A few weeks ago, I released a video titled How to Animate in Blender 2.83, and I got one question that really stood out to me. Wait, but how do I render my animation? And I realized I've been releasing Blender templates and tutorials for the past several weeks, but I haven't talked about render settings. And honestly, it's a little bit overdue and kind of necessary for us to move forward on this channel. Specifically, in this video, I'm going to talk about file formats. We'll save lighting and sampling and such for future videos. And it's a little bit complicated because I'd honestly recommend completely different render settings for different situations, but I'm going to simplify it as much as possible, and I've included a cheat sheet in the description down below. So let's get to it. My name is Chris Folea. I'm your Stream Scholar. Welcome to StreamSchool. So all of the templates I've released so far have used the webm file format. This is because I want these to be as accessible and easy to use as possible. I want literally anyone, whether they know how to use Blender or not, to be able to download the file, follow the instructions, and end up with some cool customized graphics for their live stream in under half an hour. I specifically chose webm because it gives you a nice small package that's compatible with OBS, and it supports transparent video. However, rendering a video file is actually not the ideal way to render out of Blender. For the most flexible workflow possible, you actually want to render out an image sequence. And by this, I literally mean a sequence of image files, just tons and tons of images, one image per frame. And I fully realize that this probably sounds completely insane to a lot of you. How am I supposed to use a bunch of images? Well, let's talk about the advantages of working this way. For one, webm is not supported by default in Premiere, After Effects, or DaVinci Resolve, and probably other video editing software as well, but those are the three that I'm familiar with. That means an image sequence is your best bet for transparent video in a video editing application. And I should mention here as well that most video editing applications treat image sequences just like regular footage anyway. Secondly, if Blender crashes while you're rendering and you're rendering a video file, that file is now corrupt. You can't use it. You have to restart your render from scratch. On the other hand, if you're rendering an image sequence, then all of the files that are already completed are on your hard drive somewhere. You just have to pick up where it crashed or left off. Admittedly, for the simple scenes I've been giving you, this isn't a huge deal. You'll lose maybe 20 minutes max on decent hardware. But when you start working on more complex scenes, you're looking at upwards 20 minutes per frame. And in Hollywood, it's not even unheard of to have frames that take 50 hours each. This also applies to corrupt individual frames. If one or two frames go bad in your video, or if they just don't render as expected, or even if you just want to change part of the animation, you have to re-render the entire video. While if you're working with an image sequence, you only have to re-render the specific frames that you want to change or fix. Another advantage is working with render farms for bigger projects, where you can tell several different computers to each render out a different frame simultaneously to speed up the workflow. But this is probably going to be irrelevant to most of you because it requires render farm software and an actual render farm, which is expensive. However, while that is the ideal workflow with the most flexibility, it's not necessarily always going to be the most efficient workflow or even the best workflow for every situation or every person. So let's talk about the different situations and different render settings to use as a streamer or content creator. I would recommend rendering out directly as a webm file with these settings if you need transparency in your video, the render times are not long per frame or overall, you are not going to edit your animation further after you render it out of Blender, and or you're going to use it directly in OBS from Blender. So if you just want to render straight out of Blender, shove it into OBS, and need transparency, this is your option. I would recommend rendering out as an MP4 with these settings if you do not need transparency, the render times are not long per frame or overall, you are not going to edit your animation further after you render it out of Blender, and or you're going to use it directly in OBS from Blender. So if you just want to render straight out of Blender, shove it into OBS, and do not need transparency, this is your option. I would recommend rendering out as a PNG image sequence with these settings if you do or do not need transparency. It's great for either option. The render times are a bit lengthy per frame, or overall, you are going to edit this further after you render it out, and or you are going to use it in video editing software. So if you want to do anything with your animation other than just shoving it directly into OBS from Blender, this is your option. And after you've rendered out your image sequence, you can drop it into Blender's compositor if you want to do effects and color grading, or you can just drop it directly into Blender's video sequence editor if you just want to add sound effects and render out the MP4 or WebM from there. The benefit here is if Blender crashes while you're rendering a video from an image sequence, it doesn't matter because it just doesn't take that long. All of the lengthy 3D rendering was done during the image sequence rendering phase. And you have a lot of flexibility here to do some color grading, compositing, or just using it in a YouTube video. That being said, I've included a cheat sheet in the description down below to help you figure out your ideal animation render settings. If you do choose to work with image sequences, make sure you remember to name your output file to your file name .$$$$$$.png. The pound signs will get replaced with the frame number when it renders, and that'll let your video editing software know which order to read your images in. I'd also recommend making sure you put your image sequence in its own dedicated folder for organization's sake. You're gonna have a lot of image files. And after you've chosen your render settings, all you have to do is go to Render, Render Animation, and you'll have your beautiful video or image sequence as soon as it's done. If you have any questions or just want to come hang out, I'm live every Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday at twitch.tv/oraclefishlive. And if you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button below the video and ring the bell for new content every single week. Until next time, my name is Chris Folea, I'm your stream scholar, and class is out.